Good afternoon and welcome to this information session concerning the Connecting Europe Facility Call for Proposals 2026 in the area of transport. We have today for you colleagues from CINEA, DG Move and the EUMS to present you all the features of this call for proposals from the policy angles and from the practical angles. So my name is Olivier Silam from CINEA, and I will go quickly through the agenda of this afternoon. So after my quick introduction, my colleague Philippe Chantraine, who is sitting next to me, will introduce the policy context of these CEF Transport calls. And then colleagues will go through the priorities of the calls, so to say the menu, what will be eligible under this call. Then we'll have a quick break, and colleagues from CINEA will take you through the more practical aspects. So what does the application process in eGrant looks like? What is the evaluation process? What type of award criteria do we use? The climate proofing, the CBA. And then we will end with a session of questions and answers. You have submitted a certain number of questions already, and then we will take these questions and answer them corresponding to the different topics. So I will then quickly recall the context in terms of program. So we have at CINEA a very extensive portfolio of projects covering transport. So close to 3,000 projects that are ongoing or under preparation. Not all of them are CEF. In total, it corresponds to 53 billion in terms of EU funding. And you see that we are supporting the transport sector mainly through three instruments. The CEF Transport program, of course, where we have about 2,000 projects in ongoing for about 47 billion, so ongoing or closed. And then we have, of course, Horizon Transport, the research part, with close to 900 projects for about 5 billion. And last but not least, the Innovation Fund, which also supports very important projects for transport, 15 projects, but representing close to 650 million. Now coming to the CEF Transport program, so where do we stand in the implementation of the program? So as you know, we are at the end of the implementation, meaning that we have allocated the entire budget a first time already, so the full of the 25.8 billion that were allocated to the project. You can see that on the left side that most of the projects are still ongoing. We have closed some of them. For those that have been closed, we have a good implementation record with 87 technical completion, so 87% technical completion. That's a good record to start. And then, of course, we have projects that are successful but do not use the full grant amount, projects that are less successful and then reduce their scope, and this is what we call the reflows. And the reflows is what we will use to fund the call for proposal that we are presenting today. So you see on the right side of the slide that it represents a relatively small portion of the entire budget, about 4%, 1.1 billion. It might increase a little bit, of course, in the coming months. If we have additional reflows, we will add them to the pot so that we can allocate all the amount we receive to the project we will select. Now, perhaps as a last point on my side, just to highlight the very, very competitive character of our call for proposals. You can see here as an illustration what was the situation in the last 2024 calls for the general envelope and the cohesion envelope, and for the 2023 call for our last military mobility call. And you see the proposal submitted and the grant selected, leading to a very high oversubscription rate. So it's 3 for the general envelope, 5 for the cohesion envelope, and close to 5 for military mobility. So here, of course, as the budget is even is way lower than in these previous calls, you can imagine that the competition will be fierce and that oversubscription will be very, very high. So this is a message that, of course, only very, very mature and good projects should apply, because otherwise there is little chance to be selected. But with that, I'll hand over now to my colleague Philippe Chantraine from DG Move, who will introduce to you the policy context of this call for proposal.
Thank you, Olivier, and good afternoon to everyone. I hope you are sitting cool and you have some water to drink in this very hot day we are having. I will explain a little bit the context in which this CEF reflow call is happening. The legal basis for the reflow call are 3 main regulations, which is the Connecting Europe Facility regulation, the financial regulation, and the 10T guidelines regulation. These are well established and well known, but we had, since the last call, some policy developments that are worth highlighting. The first one is the Clean Transport Corridor Initiative under the Automotive Action Plan from March 25. So this concerns in particular the charging for heavy-duty vehicles. We have presented in November last year the high-speed rail communication and the action plan, upon which we are following up here. We have the military mobility package, which was presented in November last year, and where negotiations are advancing at great pace as we speak. And last but not least, 3 months ago, we presented the EU Industrial, Maritime and Ports strategies. So all these new initiatives, of course, are political priorities, and the reflow call is also there to support these initiatives. At the same time, this reflow call is, of course, the transition between the current CEF 2 and the CEF 3 we expect to come as of 2028. So on the one hand side, we have, of course, big projects that are going on and which are running out of CEF support. So this reflow can be used to provide continued support. But at the same time, it's equally important also that we are preparing for the next MFF and that there is a good project preparation, that we have a solid pipeline for the support that can come then as of 2028. At the same time, the reflow call is a very small one, as Olivier underlined. This is per se a good message. It means that the projects that have been selected between 21 and 24 are progressing in line with the expectations, and that there's little reflows coming in. Of course, it required us to even focus more the reflow call, and this is why we try to be very precise and targeted in the interventions we would like to support. The revised work program was adopted on the 5th of June, and based on this, now the call is published. I think the key information is here summarized in this table, which shows the different amounts allocated to the different topics that will be supported under this reflow call. So first of all, we have projects on the core network, which encompasses railways and inland waterways. This is open both under the general envelope and under the cohesion envelope. You see the amounts available, 350 million in the general envelope and 260 million in the cohesion envelope. In the cohesion envelope, only the railway topic is open. But here we are following up, for instance, on the high-speed rail communication, because projects related to high-speed rail are clearly a priority under these topics. We have continued support for the external borders under the Safe Mob Gen call in a general envelope with 20 million, mainly there to ensure smooth operations at the border crossings with third countries. Following the Automotive Action Plan, we are supporting new technologies and innovation under the Smart and Interoperable Mobility for ITS in this case. And following the maritime, the port and the industrial maritime strategies, we support European maritime space and inland ports with 200 million. Road and airport sectors are supported under the AFIF with 130 million. And then we have military mobility where the reflows amount to 130 million, which makes a total of 1.1 billion at the time as we speak. Of course, any reflow that will come in between now and the selection decision will always immediately be used for selecting more projects so that we can advance further in the implementation of our network. There are a couple of new features we had to introduce given these constraints we have, notably on the budget side. First one is that we have introduced caps per grant agreement. This means that the size of the grant agreement is limited in the general envelope and the cohesion envelope. For the projects on the core network, the maximum grant amount per agreement is of 30 million if it is a grant agreement concerning one member state. If two member states are involved, the grant amount can reach 70 million, and if there are 3 or more member states, the maximum can be 100 million. Similarly, in the other calls, there are thresholds. So for the AFIF, ITS, the external borders, etc., this threshold is of 10 million. And in the military mobility, if it is a single member state, it is 20 million. And if there are 2 or more member states, it can be 40 million. And in exceptional circumstances more. You will hear this explained in more detail when we go through the different elements. The main message is here simply that with this, we are trying to make sure that we still have a network approach while having limited resources available. We know that certain projects could be consuming the whole amount that is available. And of course, this would not be in line with an approach where we try to develop the TEN-T network across the whole union. But please be aware that if the application requests higher amounts than the caps, the proposal will be declared ineligible. And that means it will not even go to evaluation. So be very careful here in the application to make sure your application respects the caps foreseen and that your proposal is not, or your application is not discarded in the very first stages of the evaluation procedure. A second element which is across the board and quite important is that we want to ensure that the money is spent within the timeline. Olivier already underlined the importance of maturity in this call. Now, experience has shown if a project combines both studies and works on the same section, so that there has to be first a study phase and consequently works based on those studies, that these projects are likely to run into delays and not being implemented fully in the time that is foreseen. Now, we have little time to implement these projects. We are at the end of the multi-annual financial framework period, so we do not want to run this risk. So in the application, if there is a study part, it has to concern a different section than the work parts if the two are in the same proposal. So keep those things separated. There can be no consequential studies and works for the same section and activity, because again, this would lead to too long implementation periods that are not, for which we cannot cater at this stage anymore. The maximum duration for the projects is by end of 29 for studies, end of 2030 for works. Also to clarify that the TEN-T extended core network is not eligible. This is relevant for the rail topic. Again, the focus is on the core network, and given the limited means available, we really have to be targeted and focused. So it is the core network only. We then for the CBA, however, are somehow simplifying, because the CBA is only required for works projects which are submitted under the Core Gen or the Core Cohen calls. So for the others, it is not needed and hence should not be submitted. And important, the work program allows for the possibility of reserve lists. This possibility is very likely to materialize. We are assuming that we will have reserve lists on the 3 topics indicated for the 3 envelopes we have, because as Olivier said, we are expecting huge oversubscription, and for any reflow that would happen after the selection decision, these reflows would then immediately serve the projects on the reserve list in function of the ranking that is foreseen in the reserve list. So one more time, all the reflows that come in up to the selection decision will be used immediately to select projects and finance projects, even if it goes beyond the indicative amounts that are which have been presented in the call. And for all the reflows which happen after the selection decision, there will be the reserve list which can then, where projects can benefit from additional reflows which happen then up until the end of 27, because then we cannot, CINEA can no longer sign grant agreements after that. The timeline for this call is the following. So we voted in the committee in May. The work program adopted in June. The call was announced last week. We are sitting in the info day, and you have time until the 6th of October to prepare your application and to introduce it. Don't wait for the last minute, but you know the drill on that. The evaluation, as usually, will take a couple of months, but the intention is to present the selection results to the CEF committee in March 27, which would allow to start then the grant agreement preparation, so that the grant agreements can be signed by July 27, and in the meantime we will adopt the selection decision formally. So this is the overall context of this call. In a few words, one more time, key messages are: be focused, focus on the priorities, and come with good applications for mature projects, because we have to ensure that the reflow money goes into projects which will really materialize within the time foreseen, because there's no time for errors anymore. Money would be lost for the program, and this is certainly something we want to prevent. With this, I will now hand over to the presentation of the call priorities, and the first priority is the military mobility, and here I hand over to Antoine, the Deputy Head of Unit for TEN-T Policy. Please.
Thank you very much, Philip, and good afternoon from my side to everybody as well. And I will be pleased to actually share this point together with Major Kojokariu sitting next to me from the EU military staff. Few elements maybe to start with, and Philip, you already gave a good introduction on the policy context, but here on the policy context, I think it's also important to note the importance of military mobility in transport policy at the EU level in general. Indeed, the transport of military equipment and troop is very important, and we try to solve the barriers to this kind of transport as much as we can, notably through the package which has been adopted in November last year. One of the elements contained here is, of course, related to infrastructure, and this is very much relevant for the discussion today, because one of the things we try to do is actually to make sure that the network is upgraded to the right requirements. And this is particularly also important in the evolving global context, I would say, so which really calls for importance of resilience, preparedness, and deterrence on the network. So maybe just few additional elements of context. So now if we go a bit, or if we dive a bit deeper into the call as such, so for this military mobility call, it concerns both, well, it concerns work studies or mixed projects in principle. In terms of eligibility, we are looking at projects that could be covering all the different modes of transport, so everything is eligible there, and provided that they address both the civilian and the defense needs. And I think here this is also stressing the importance of the synergies that exist in transport infrastructure for both the civilian use and the military use. What does this mean in more concrete possibilities? So here we encourage you to consider different type of projects to facilitate the cross-border movement, to also increase the capacity of the network to bear the overweight or oversized cargo that is linked to military transport. So here the rail capacity as well is important, with going to 740 meters train. The loading gauge, strengthening of bridges is important. Anything that links to increase the capacity and connectivity of the multimodal hub and the ports in particular are also quite important. The co-funding rates for this call, it's a maximum 50% of the eligible costs. So additional elements to bear in mind for projects on this call, and this actually relate to mostly two aspects. One links to the geography and the other one to the type of requirements to fulfill. In terms of geography, projects should be located on the TEN-T, and they should also be located on the EU military network, as it is defined in the military requirements, which were last updated in March 2025 in a council decision. So this is for the geography. The second element is the requirements, or the type of standards to meet, in line with the dual use requirement, which are all in the Commission Implementing Regulation 2021/1328. The idea is to upgrade the infrastructure to the relevant standard, and so here in the implementing regulation that I just mentioned, you will have here all the different explanation of what are the standards we are looking at and what is the goal we are looking for. One important element here to mention is that we address only the cost of the upgrade to the requirements as defined in the said regulation. So anything that goes beyond is actually not considered in the cost. One important aspect here, the last point on the slide, going back to actually the geography, it's about, and you have that clearly explained in the call document, or explicitly mentioned in the call document, priority will be given as well to the projects that are located on the 4 EU priority military mobility corridor, that are also defined in the council decision on the military mobility requirement, and to projects located in 2 or more member states. Again, a bit what Philippe was mentioning earlier, with a view to produce the highest or the strongest network effect as quickly as possible. One element in terms of preparing applications, and you have already received the encouragement to start early in the preparation, but one element, or few elements also to bear in mind here, it is actually very important that the application clearly defines the actual parameter of the existing infrastructure that will be upgraded or replaced, and also the future parameters that will be achieved once the projects are actually carried out, so that they can be assessed against the TEN-T requirement, about the CEF dual use requirement, and then we are able to actually make a fully fledged assessment of the proposal. And I think this is an extremely important element for actually looking towards the evaluations. Now, Philippe already mentioned caps. So in here, indeed, the Maximum EU contribution will be capped 20 million for a project located in only one member state, 40 million for projects that would be located in more than one member state, but it could be also exceptionally increased for projects involving more than 2 member states, or when it's justified by the scale, the coordination needs, or the strategic relevance of the project. In terms of award criteria, so we look at the same award criteria as the CEF Transport call. So this is the priority, urgency, the maturity, the quality, the impact, and the catalytic effect. And here, the important element is as well is that we look at the military aspects under the priority and urgency criterion. And this is what also Radu will present in a moment. As such as well, the evaluation is actually a combination of the assessment of the military mobility aspect, which is carried out by the colleagues from the EU military staff, but also the assessment of the independent expert as well for the sort of standard, quote-unquote, standard part of the evaluation. So this is to provide the most complete picture on the project and the most complete assessment on the project. I think with that, I give the floor to Radu, because then, Radu, you will explain maybe a bit more how you look indeed at the military value of the projects.
Thank you, Antoine. Thank you, Antoine, and good afternoon from my side also. The military assessment will be based on the evaluation sheet template, which you can find in Annex 13, Appendix 13.1, of the military requirements for military mobility within and beyond the EU, which contains 2 evaluation criteria. The first criterion related to the military value of the projects that will be evaluated by the European Union military staff will be: to what extent does the proposed project contribute to enhance strategic deployment of the military forces in the EU for missions, operations, and routine activities? Now I will read the sub-criteria. A, to what extent does the project contribute to cross-border synergies? B, to what extent does the project contribute to enhance EU battle group strategic deployment, including the potential strategic deployment leg? C, to what extent does the project contribute to the strategic deployment for one of the EU common security and defense policy scenarios? D, is the project proposal in line with the Member States' National Military Mobility Plan? And the last sub-criterion, other comments relevant to criterion number 1, including the assessment of urgency of the proposed project, taking into account the new situation created by the Russian war of aggression against Ukraine. The second criterion that will direct EUMS's evaluation is: to what extent does the proposed project identify gaps on the Member States' infrastructure network, including bottlenecks currently undermining military movements? And now I will list the sub-criteria under this general criterion. A, to what extent will the project facilitate movement of military oversized and overloaded assets on the transport network? To what extent will the project have an impact on decreasing congestion on the transport and multimodal nodes? C, to what extent is the project connected to the entire main Member States and EU military transport network? D, to what extent will the project provide unrestricted access to the military for routine activities? And the last criterion, E, its other comments relevant to criteria number 2 is similar to the criteria number 1 that is linked to the Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine. And I think that this includes my part. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's continue with railway projects on the core network. This year's calls are covering the railway topic in 2 specific calls. It's Core CON and Core GEN. In both cases, we will be supporting works, studies, or mixed projects which are addressing construction or upgrading of cross-border links and missing links. We will be also supporting interconnections between rail and other transport modes, such as inland waterway or maritime, which of course will include port hinterland connections. And we will be also supporting projects aimed at the integration of the high-speed rail and air networks. As regards the maximum funding rates, it will be 85% under the cohesion envelope. In general envelope, it will be 30% for works and 50% for studies. Please bear also in mind that you can request additional top-up for projects addressing cross-border links up to 50%. As already mentioned by Philip, there are some different aspects within these two calls compared to the previous calls. So let's them repeat again because they are very important. The priority will be given to projects fostering the development of high-speed rail in line with the Commission communication on high-speed rail from November 2025. And for the purpose of these two calls, the TEN-T extended core network is not eligible, so only core network will be eligible. Please bear also in mind that this time we will be not supporting any trackside ERTMS, any electronic interlockings, Class A radio or data systems, National Class B system, nor the rolling stock, which also includes ERTMS onboard deployment. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I am pleased to present you the call topic inland waterways. Under this topic, we support projects on the TEN-T waterways core network works projects. The following types, mainly the following types of interventions are covered: upgrade of existing TEN-T waterways, as well as related infrastructures such as locks, bridges, dams, or weirs. The projects should aim for one or the following objectives: to improve navigation conditions, improve performance, increase the capacity for the passage of vessels, or ensure a good navigation status. Moreover, we also support interventions for creating new waterways on the TEN-T network, which have to be done in line with the TEN-T regulation, and as well, of course, the related infrastructure on these waterways, such as locks, bridges, dams, weirs. We want to also emphasize that this list of interventions is not exhaustive, so we encourage you to also check closely the FAQs published for this topic, where you find the information on eligibility of other types of interventions along the waterway. We also would like to highlight the types of interventions that are not eligible under this topic. This includes interventions in inland ports, waterside infrastructure along the TEN-T waterways. If it's aimed for waterborne operation, transshipment is also not eligible, and works for digitalization, such as implementation of river information services, inland port community systems, and inland port information or management systems, are also not supported under this topic. Thank you very much.
And the next one to intervene, thank you, Carmina, for this presentation on inland waterways. Next one, Diego, for the external borders, please.
Thank you, Philippe. Indeed, moving on to the external border topic. This topic has as objective to modernize the transport infrastructure at the TEN-T network with the purpose of facilitating traffic flows for rail and road transport at border control areas at the Union external border of the TEN-T network. For this call, support will be given to rail projects facilitating traffic flows on the TEN-T border crossing points, including in particular as regards to interoperability. Moving on to road projects, Support will be given to road projects modernizing road BCPs, in particular concerning the upgrade of parking spaces for trucks, of waiting areas, and of road lane capacity from the parking spaces to the border control points and between them, provided that it facilitates traffic flows at the Union external border. One precision on this topic is that only transport infrastructure will be supported. Border check equipment and facilities are not supported as a standalone project. They may, however, be supported in case it forms part of a wider project concerning the adaptation of transport infrastructure, in cases such as smart IT solutions, which facilitate or accelerate border checks and alleviate congestion at BCPs, and fixed devices integrated into the transport infrastructure. In conclusion, a precision in relation to this topic is that we would expect that projects submitted under this topic are always coordinated across the border with the third country in question in order to have projects leading to an overall improvement of the BCP and maximize the impact of the funding. Thank you.
Many thanks, Diego. And now we move on to the smart and interoperable.
Allow myself one slide for the background, because I think with the focus we have here on autonomous driving, it's not a classical funding area of the CEF. But as we have been discussing quite a lot on how we can improve the competitiveness for autonomous driving, but also how we can include it in the mobility system, we realize that one of the important enabling conditions actually is digital infrastructure. As transport infrastructure. And so to help the large-scale cross-border testbeds for autonomous driving, we want also to support the digital infrastructure that is needed to run the operations of autonomous vehicles. We hope as a byproduct to support thereby as well the alignment of rules. Alignment of rules is the main work on the testbed. Of course, infrastructure and rules are separated, but to have similar rules, you need similar infrastructure. So we see here a need for the CEF as well. If we look at the projects that we want to support here, it is mainly about establishing the control centers, so the IT equipment for the remote supervision of highly automated vehicles, in challenging or unexpected situations. So the vehicles normally need to drive themselves, but they might encounter situations where they need the control center to help or to stop them. And as well, the digital infrastructure for accurate vehicle positioning, and as well direct communication with the surrounding environment. Mainly we talk there about the CITS that has been part of the CEF before, but also direct communication between emergency services and autonomous vehicles. Last, the digital infrastructure to enable transmission of driving data and recordings of events, mainly for security reasons, but also if it's reused for that, for learning in the end of AI for autonomous driving. And only in brackets here, if small changes to the physical infrastructure are needed to complement this digital infrastructure, so maybe a renewal of lane marking or small works there, that can be part of a project. It cannot be a standalone project. Yep.
Thank you, Jakub. Very clear. Now we enter the area of alternative fuels, and we will have first Dusan presenting the situation for HDV and for airport, and then Shimon and Maria for everything waterborne. Dusan, please.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon to everyone joining us online today. So my name is Dusan Kovacevic. I work at CINEA in the Alternative Fuels team. I am glad to take over from my colleague and to walk you through the alternative fuels part of this call. So in the next few minutes, I will explain 4 things: which projects we can support, where they must be located, which costs you can and cannot claim, and how the financing works. So let me start with the first type of project. So the first type of project eligible for funding is publicly accessible charging pools for heavy-duty vehicles, so for trucks and buses. Here we support 2 kinds of pools. The first kind is a pool with at least 4 megawatt charging system points. We call this system MCS. Each of these points must have a power output of at least 1 megawatt. They don't need all to charge at same power. They don't need to charge at full power at the same time, but the capacity must be there. The second kind is a mix. It combines at least 4 MCS points with 1 megawatt each, together with combined charging system points. We call this CCS, of at least 350 kilowatts each. There is an important rule here. In each pool, the number of the smaller 350 kilowatt points cannot be higher than the number of the 1 megawatt points. So in simple words, the higher power point must always be the majority. Now, where can this infrastructure be built? The location matters a lot, and it must be in one of these 3 places. First, on the TEN-T road network or within 3 kilometers driving distance from the nearest exit of a TEN-T road. Second, in the safe and secure parking area, an SSPA, that is also on or near a TEN-T network within that same 3 kilometers limit. Or third, in a TEN-T urban node. This can include port and airport areas, as long as the horizontal requirement of the call are met. For all of these locations, the maximum co-funding rate under the general envelope is 30%. Now, the second type of project eligible for funding moves us from the road to the airport. And it is the electrification of airport ground operations. Here, we support 4 activities. First, electricity and preconditioned air supply to aircraft and airships while they are parked. This can be through fixed equipment or mobile equipment with 0 tailpipe emission. Second, electricity supply facility for ground operation vehicles. So these are vehicles that move around the airport. Third, electricity supply facility for electric or hybrid electric aircraft and airships. And fourth, the related electricity storage inside the airport area. Now, the location rule is simple. All of these projects must be on a TEN-T airport, as listed in Annex 2.2 of the TEN-T regulation. The maximum co-funding rate under the general envelope is again 30%. Now, I would like to say a few things about synergetic elements. These are works or installations that belong to the energy sector, but that you can add to your project to improve its climate and environmental benefits. 2 of them are eligible. First, on-site electricity generation based on renewable energy sources. Second is the electricity grid connection. But there is a clear limit. The total cost of these synergetic elements cannot be more than 20% of the total eligible costs of your action. And they must sit in a dedicated work package so they are easy to identify. Now, let me turn to what we cannot fund. This slide is very important. I will group them for you. First, horizontal costs. These include project management, communication, and dissemination. Second, preparatory activities such as land acquisition, the renting or leasing of facilities, procurement and permits, and all studies, designs, and work supervision. Third, administrative costs. This means travel costs and all indirect costs. Fourth, all operating costs, the OPEX. This includes energy consumption and consumables. And fifth, all staff costs of the applicant, even when the work is done in-house. And finally, a few specific items that are never eligible. Costs related to vehicles, the upgrade of existing recharging infrastructure, grid connection equipment that is owned by the distribution system operator, the DSO, or the transmission system operator, TSO. And recharging pools located in elevated or underground parking buildings, in car and truck dealer premises, or in any place used by only one specific group of users. So please, before you submit, check your budget carefully against this list. Now, my last slide is about the blending principle. And this is a rule that every applicant must respect. Every action that is received, every action that receives a grant, under these priorities must also include a mandatory financing component. In other words, the grant alone is not enough. You must bring additional financing. There are three things to remember. First, the financing must come from a public or private financial institution, and it must cover at least 10% of the proposed project cost. Second, it can take different forms: loan, bonds, or equity. And third, you must prove it with a document called the Financial Approval Letter, FAL, the FAL. I would like to highlight that the FAL must be included as part of the application. So in short, a strong project in the right location with a clean budget and a solid financing component. That brings me to the end of my part. Thank you very much for your attention. And I give the floor to my next colleague.
Thank you very much, Dusan. So you see that this is the continuation of AFIF with slight adaptations, so be careful to read in particular the rules concerning the financial approval letter, where deadlines are not the same anymore as beforehand. So to add a little bit of flexibility given the limited time to prepare these projects. The same approach also applies to the European maritime space and inland ports, and for that I'm very happy that Shimon has joined us just in time. Shimon, over to you.
Thank you, Philippe. Good afternoon, everybody. Oh, that's the pointer. Now I need to see. Okay. Yes. Now it's the slide, so I can start. I will be speaking about the topic related to European maritime space and inland ports. In principle, this topic covers two types of projects. As you can see on the slide, first type of projects to be supported refers to the deployment of onshore power supply and charging infrastructure in 10 maritime and inland ports, with reference to alternative fuel infrastructure regulation. And the second type of projects, which is kind of novelty under CEF, is the support to be provided to the decarbonization of vessels. So this is about fitting or retrofitting of the energy systems of inland waterway vessels and short sea shipping vessels, including ferries. This kind of support will concern works. And then on the right side of the slide, you can see the maximum co-funding rate, which is planned for this type of projects. Under the general envelope, it's 30% of the total eligible costs. Maximum EU contribution per project or grant agreement is capped at the level of 10 million, and maximum EU contribution for fitting or retrofitting is capped at a level of 5 million euro per vessel. So you can imagine it could be a project which could combine more than one vessel at the condition that the maximum EU grant is no more than 10 million. At the same time, we also allow a project that combines both onshore power supply and fitting and retrofitting of vessel, and this should be presented in a separate work packages. Now, I will be focusing on the vessel part, and the onshore power supply will be taken up by my colleague from CINEA. Regarding the vessel support, This is about fitting or retrofitting of the energy systems with electric, hybrid, hydrogen, ammonia, methanol, and biomethane technologies, substitute source of energy, referred to Article 3 of FuelEU Maritime Regulation, and the installation of wind-assisted propulsion. And then the type of vessels which are falling under this call are maritime ferries of at least 2,000 gross tons engaged in regular service for the transport of passengers, vehicles, and or cargo on fixed routes between 2 or more maritime ports, of which at least one is a TEN-T core or comprehensive maritime port. Second category of vessel supported is short sea shipping type of vessels of at least 2,000 gross tons, operating passenger or freight transport services in coastal sea areas and calling at least one TEN-T core on comprehensive maritime port. And the third category are inland waterway vessels operating in the TEN-T inland waterways transport network, longer than 20 meters and with more than 12 passenger capacity. Now, specifically, what this means for the vessel support. It means that CEF funding will cover fully electric or hybrid power propulsion system, wind-assisted propulsion, substitute source of energy, and energy storage system, both used predominantly for a propulsion system. Specifically, if we speak about new builds, so we called it in the call fitting, this means the support will be given to electric, hybrid, hydrogen, ammonia, or methanol technologies. For the retrofitting of existing vessels, this means support for electric, hybrid, hydrogen, ammonia, methanol, or biomethane technologies. For hybrid electric vessels, there is another condition, specific condition to be fulfilled. Those vessels, as a result of fitting or retrofitting, must have short-side battery charging, and their battery capacity shall be sufficient to cover at least 10 nautical miles. Be mindful that the call will not cover exclusive day trip tourism vessels, recreational craft, tugboats, icebreakers, or cruise vessels. Those categories are not supported. The other conditions to be met, you can see them on the slide. First of all, a fitting or retrofitting contract for a supported vessel must be signed after the call publication date and no later than 21st of December 2027, so by the end of the next year. The applicants must, first of all, indicate the fueling recharging capacities currently available or that will be available by the end of the project at the ports which will be served by the supported vessels. Secondly, they must explain the contribution of their project to the development of the EU manufacturing capacity in the maritime sector, and made in EU technologies, with particular reference to the EU Industrial Maritime Strategy. And the third condition, vessels must fly an EU flag and shall serve at least one TEN-T maritime or inland port for a minimum of 5 years after the end of the project. So with this slide, I'm passing over to my colleague Maria.
Thank you, Shimon. Good afternoon to our online audience. I'm going to present you the eligibility conditions and criteria with regard to the second type of projects that can be funded under the Sustainable Mobility Call. And these projects can encompass investments related to onshore power supply systems and shoreside battery charging systems at port site. The intended usage of this system must be seagoing and or freight passenger vessels, including tugboats and cruise vessels. Inland waterway vessels are included as well. The projects may include, in addition to the essential installations related to the onshore power supply and the shoreside battery charging systems, also upgrade of electrical grid within the maritime port and inland ports if these works are needed for the installation of the onshore power supply and the SBC systems. I would like to emphasize that the projects related to these investments must be located in TEN-T maritime and inland ports listed in Annex 2 of the TEN-T regulation. It can be that, for example, a maritime port covers under its jurisdiction also other smaller ports in its proximity. Nevertheless, only the geographical area of those ports that are explicitly named in Annex 2 of the TEN-T regulation are eligible locations for funding of these projects. Also, facilities and infrastructure must be accessible for use by all operators on a non-discriminatory basis. These projects can also include synergetic elements such as on-site renewable energy generation, for example, wind turbines or photovoltaic power plants, then electricity grid connection from the port to the grid outside of the port, as well as shoreside power banks or energy storage systems in form of batteries. For all types of synergetic elements, there are a couple of conditions that need to be met. The usage needs to be primarily for the onshore power supply and the SBC systems, and this has to be clearly demonstrated in the application. Then the synergetic element may not be more than 20% of the total eligible project costs. The related activities must be grouped in a separate work package and also planned in the budget tables under the separate cost category earmarked for synergetic elements, that is D3. And also, it has to be demonstrated in the application that the synergetic elements, which are proposed to be part of the project, improve the socioeconomic, climate, or environmental benefits of the project itself. Also, for this type of EMS and inland ports projects, for both of them, for fitting, retrofitting of vessels and onshore power supply and SBCs, there are certain categories of costs which are not eligible. These are any costs related to activities including preparatory activities such as upgrade of already existing charging infrastructure within a port, costs related to grid connection equipment which is owned by the distribution system operator or transmission system operator, any types of preparatory feasibility studies, designs, work supervision, etc., procurement permits, leasing or renting facilities. Also, project management costs are not eligible, communication and dissemination, other administrative costs, regardless if they are incurred by own staff of the applicants or will be subcontracted. So the focus is really on purely works-related activities what is strictly needed in order to implement the OPS, SBC, or to fit or retrofit a vessel. Operating expenditures, including consumables and energy, are excluded from the eligibility as well. The novelty for the EMS and inland ports proposals under this call is also the blending component, which means that actions receiving support under this call shall provide mandatory financing component, and that is financing from public or private financial institution, minimum 10% of the proposed project costs. It can also take form of loans, bonds, or equity. And the secured financing component needs to be proven by the financial approval letter, as my colleague Dusan has already explained, which needs to be provided at the latest 30 days after selection notification. And that brings me to the end of our call priorities.
Thank you very much, Maria. We promised a coffee break, and we will do so. We are advanced compared to the agenda that was presented in the beginning. We would suggest that we start again in 15 minutes at 3:15 Brussels time, and then you will hear about the application process in eGrants, the evaluation process, and we will answer the questions that were submitted so far. So see you back in 15 minutes. Drink water, it's warm outside. Thank you. Okay, welcome back. We will continue now with the next agenda items, which is the application process in eGrants. But let me still come back one more time on something I have said, which was not fully correct. The outcome of all the evaluation will lead to the selection decision indeed, and with the reserve list, we will make sure that we can also use any reflows coming after the selection decision, and this will lead us into 2028. So this reserve list will be available until then, and CINEA can still sign grant agreements in 2028, but these are things that will be very clearly spelled out in the selection decision when it comes to it. The most important for you is now to prepare good applications, and this will now be explained to you how this goes. So Natasha, over to you.
Thank you. So in this section, we will go through the application process in eGrants, and more specifically in the funding and tenders portal of the European Commission. We will focus on the submission of the proposal, a step-by-step, on how to find also the topic-specific and general FAQs, and the applicant submission checklist that we recommend to follow. As a first step, and before creating the application, applicants are reminded to have a valid EU login account and to have participant identification code, which is the PIC for each entity. And if you have any existing PIC, to make sure to update it if needed, and including the LIR. Going to the funding and tenders portal and how to find the calls more specifically. You can see here the page related to the call for proposals of the European Commission. You have calls from different European programs, and part of it is the Connecting Europe Facility program. It is then possible to filter by program, call, submission status on the left in order to narrow down the search. In this case, if you select CEF, or the Connecting Europe Facility, and you select Open for Submission, you'll have a list of all available calls that are possible to apply to. We would like to remind you that if the topic ID reads work, in some cases, study project, works project, and mix can also be submitted. So please look into the call text and topic description for the related calls in order to see what are the conditions for each topic. Once the topic is selected, you will be redirected to a topic page. And here you have all the relevant information of the topic. For example, the topic description, the conditions and documents, including the call document, the topic-related FAQs, and the submission IT tool. So we strongly recommend to have a look at all the different sections and documents available before submitting a proposal. To access the IT environment where you will prepare your application and submit it, you need to go to the Start Submission. Once there, you select the topic in question and you click on Start. You will be redirected to the Submission IT tool, the main page to be used when preparing your application. You have here different highlighted boxes in order to highlight the main elements. For example, the deadline, the 6th of October 2026, as already mentioned, the call data with all the relevant elements of the call and topic, the Part B template, which should be downloaded from here, taken from this version, not from previous version if you have any. And on the right, you have in purple all the boxes related to what you need to fill in or upload. For example, Part A, where you edit forms on the budget, on the participant detail, the GIS data, and other elements as well. Then you have also the annexes and the Part B, which should be uploaded in the system. And here we would like to note that all annexes that are visible on the right, when you click on a call, are required for the selected calls. And required annexes might change between calls. So it is strongly recommended to fill all of these as soon as possible, as you'll be able to edit them also until the submission deadline. We would like also to give you a couple of tips for the Part A. First of all, starting by how to formulate or how to create the acronym of your proposal. Keep in mind that it's very important to have 1 or 2 keywords, a maximum of 20 characters for the acronym. The title must be very concise, not in caps lock if possible, and in English as well, with a maximum of 200 characters. For the abstract or the short description, please stick to a short, factual description, explaining what is being done by the project and what will be expected as results and outcomes as clearly and simply as possible, so that everyone who will be able to understand what the project is about and use quantifiable results as much as possible as well. For example, reduce travel time, improve safety, enhance security, and many other. To have a clearer idea of what I just said, we have here an example of the 3 sections that I mentioned. For example, here we have a title of Ungeni Cross-Border Infrastructure Romania-Moldova, and you have an abstract that is starting by what is the project about, what is the aim, what is the outcome and result of it, and ending with what are the benefits of the project and what does it contribute to the transport network in general. Regarding Part B, also a couple of tips on these. While filling this document in Word, in the description of each package, each work package in section 6.2, it must be very well detailed. We would like to remind you to describe well the work packages with clear descriptions of the various tasks, relevant technical features and measurable outcomes. Mention also critical path of milestones, concrete deliverable and clear deliverable as well. It is also mandatory for all applicants to encode a GIS for the project. This will also be available in the submission tool. You have a guide that once you access this platform, you will have it, which can help you in how to do it if you don't know. And you can also visualize the TNT corridors on the map by selecting the relevant one in the table of content. Concerning budget requirements for the proposal, a couple of important elements here as well. You must register the budget in Part A of the application, in the submission system, and in the detailed budget table per work package, which is an Excel file uploaded directly in the annexes of the system. Regarding the detailed budget table per work package and how it is structured, you will have to complete the data per work package and reporting period. So there is no differentiation per cost category here whatsoever. There are 5 fields which you can see on the screen that should be filled in. You will have to fill in the white cell. The gray ones will be calculated automatically, for example, the total amounts. And in step 5, and this is an important element, you should encode the requested EU contribution that you have in Part A. This might, in some cases, result in a red warning, as you can see here, that is linked to this difference, which is acceptable for these calls because we have the cap threshold that was mentioned earlier. On Part A, each topic comes with a pre-configured funding rate. You should encode the budget based on 5 cost categories. A, the personnel costs, B, subcontracting, C, the purchase, and if applicable, category D. So here it depends. If you have studies, they should be included in cost category D2 in order to allow a funding rate of 50% for those. If it's only a studies project, also it should be recorded in category D2 fully and not split over. Another option is the synergetic elements for applicable for works only. If you have such elements that are related to synergies with sectors such as energy or digital, they should be included in category D3 in order to allow and to ensure the cap of 20% of total eligible costs. If also is the case, works in outermost regions must be included in category D4 in order to allow a 70% funding rate for works only. And land purchases should be in category D5, but this is only allowed for the CORCON calls. Do not register any cost under category D1, which is the financial support for third parties, or any indirect costs. Here we have an example of how it will practically look like for you once you start encoding it. Everything that is in green is possible, so it depends, of course, on your project. The box that is on the right in red, here, the maximum EU contribution will be calculated automatically based on the funding rate that you have for this topic. But the requested EU contribution must be encoded manually by you in order to respect the capped or the threshold per call that you have in each call document. So it is very important to request the correct maximum if applicable for your project. So here too, as it was already mentioned before, but here how it should be in more detail, how it looks like, this EU contribution threshold. Your application should include, in normal terms, the actual eligible costs that are associated with the project or with parts of the project that you are applying for. The submission system, in normal terms as well, calculate the maximum EU contribution that you can apply for. But you must request a lower EU contribution to be aligned with this applicable threshold. And as it was already mentioned, requesting a higher EU contribution will declare the proposal ineligible. This will create as well a warning in the annex of the detailed budget table per work package, which can be ignored for these calls. Concerning the consequence of budgets, planning and structure that we have been talking about, a couple of very important elements that we would like to also highlight. Firstly, the cost should be rounded down to the nearest 1,000 euro. Second, for studies only proposals, if it is the case, please keep in your accounts the further split per cost categories of personnel, subcontracting and purchases, if you have that, in order to be able to report on this division later on if the proposal is selected. Third, you should make sure that total costs must match well between the budget tables per cost category and per work packages. Of course, there will be this divergence that we talked about in case there is a lower requested EU contribution. But in general, keep in mind, if you have any mistake, Part A will prevail for the evaluation of your proposal. Fourth, please prepare and plan well your accounting even from the beginning. Any cost that is foreseen to be claimed for reimbursement in the future must be clearly attributable to both of these approaches, per work package and per cost category. 5, also define well the work packages with a single funding rate to avoid complexity of financial reporting later on. And lastly, works for synergetic elements or land purchases must be defined as separate work package as well. We move on here to the FAQs. And for the CEF Transport calls, we have two ways of accessing FAQs. We have the general FAQs that you can find through the search tool on the Funding and Tenders portal. All CEF Transport general FAQs start with CEF Transport, so you can search with this keyword, and then it can be exported into a data set or an Excel file. Another way of searching for FAQs, it is through the topic-related FAQs that can be found in the related topic pages. And there you just click on it and you have the list of available topic FAQs. If you need further help, more than what was presented today, you will find a lot of information on the Funding and Tenders portal. But if you need also some more specific code-related questions, you can contact the CINEA CEF Transport calls or the IT service desk for any related IT question. And here, to reach the end of that section, we have prepared to you a submission checklist that is important to keep in mind and to review before submitting the application. So first of all, make sure that you're submitting the application under the correct topic. And encode all sections of application form Part A directly in the system. Nothing can be sent outside of the system. Indicate the location of the project through the GIS data button. Please fill in well and as much as detail this part. Complete and upload the application form Part B that contains all the technical description of the project with a maximum of 120 pages. And this is important because only these 120 pages will be made visible to the evaluators in the system. Also, complete and upload all mandatory annexes in line with the call document. Please make sure not to skip any if it's required. Use the forms that are provided inside the electronic submission system and do not change any template or form before submitting them. We will now move to the section related to the lessons learned addressed to the applicants from the previous calls on the admissibility and the eligibility checks that we do on our end. So the first step is the admissibility check, and that has the purpose of verifying the compliance of the proposal with the admissibility criteria that are set in Section 5 of the core document. And what are the admissibility criteria? Actually, they are the fact that the proposal is electronically submitted and on time before the call deadline of 6th of October 26, contains the forms provided in the submission system, and that is also complete. And by complete here, we talk again about the application form Part A, having all the administrative information of the participants and the budget correctly filled in the system. Second, to have the application form Part B, which contains the technical description of the project, and to have all the mandatory annexes that we've already mentioned in the system. But here we would like to highlight what are exactly these mandatory annexes. Agreement by the concerned member state that is benefiting from the project, and this is for all applications. The environmental compliance file for all applications as well, and for works and for studies with physical interventions and for studies without physical intervention. So in general, all applications should have this document submitted. The detailed budget table per work package and calculator, this is also required for all applications. The timetable and Gantt chart as well. The activity reports of last year and the list of previous projects. These include key projects that your entity has made in the last 4 years. There's a template also available for that in the submission system. However, it is they are exempted from operational capacity, public bodies, member state organizations, international organizations, and all beneficiaries of grants under CEF 1 and CEF 2. Full cost benefit analysis, which is the CBA report, and the CBA cash flow template or the simplified CBA calculator. These are required for works proposals under CoreGen and CoreCoN only, and they depend on the maximum costs that are being requested. Military map declaration, which is required only for military mobility call, and the financing approval letter that we have seen before, that is only required under AFIFGen and SOSTMOBGen calls. But to mention the lessons learned from previous calls on these admissibility check, which can maybe help you to avoid that. First of all, the environmental compliance file is a document that consists of the cover page that should be filled in and of the environmental compliance questionnaire, which includes all these declarations, the development consent and the compliance with the directives that should accompany the file when applicable and do not replace the environmental compliance file on their own. So here we've had situations where incomplete application resulted from this missing or incomplete environmental compliance file, which was not fully submitted, not duly signed or dated. Declarations were missing whenever they were needed. So in general, keep in mind that this environmental compliance file must be submitted. If not, if it's missing or if it's incomplete, the proposal is automatically not admissible. It should also have a comprehensive and complete content with the necessary approvals by the competent authority and signed well by them, and to have the information required in the boxes that you will find there. If not, this all will have a negative impact on the evaluation. If the proposal or if the project in general is implemented in multiple countries, each member state should fill out also one environmental compliance file. And then all these environmental compliance files should be merged into one file for submission. Other examples of lessons learned or issues that we faced with the admissibility checks in the past concern the applications with no grant amount requested in Part A because it was mistakenly forgotten, a wrong budget uploaded not corresponding to the requested amount in CEP, in the Funding and Tenders portal in that case, the member state agreement that is not signed, agreements from other concerned member states when we have multiple that are missing, so we only have one in some cases, and the agreement from a local public entity that is not the concerned member state ministry for transport. Other examples also concern inconsistencies between budget, the budget table per work package of the annex and Part A, CBA report referring to another proposal, CBA report that has an empty document, or mistakenly submitting a simplified CBA calculator in the place of CBAs. Also missing activity report of last year that are not submitted, and incorrect Gantt chart that were referring to other project than the submitted one. And the second part of these checks that are made by CINEA concern the eligibility of the proposal, checking the eligibility requirement in line with Section 6 of the call document. Here it concerns the checks that the proposal are submitted by applicants who are legal entities, public or private bodies that are established in the EU member states or in the countries that are associated to the Connecting Europe Facility program. Eligibility checks also concern that the activities proposed are within the technical scope of the topic described in Section 2 of the concerned call document. The geographic location of the project is on the TNT network, and the project duration, the earliest starting day may be the proposal submission. The end date cannot be later than 2029 for studies and 2030 for works. And finally, the project budget, it is recommended to have a minimum of €1 million for EU contribution requested, and not larger than the call threshold in the different call documents. And to finish, also a couple of lessons learned from previous eligibility checks. We've had issues with proposals that were submitted by applicants from non-eligible countries, location of the proposals that is not connected to the TNT, project start date in Part A and Part B of the applications are different, the project duration is wrongly calculated, or the project being out of scope, so out of the topic content, and the project proposal or the global project that is insufficiently clear. With that, I conclude the part and I give the floor to my colleagues.
Thank you very much, Natasha, and let me please repeat the message here. All the examples you have seen of what can go wrong, we have seen them in applications we have received. So even if it looks a little bit redundant to say you have to fill in the mandatory annexes, we have seen applications failing for this. So please check your applications carefully, go through this presentation again and make sure you comply with all the requirements that are there. The competition will be fierce and quality of the application can make a difference. So make sure your application is spot on. But let's look now how the evaluation will go. And here I give over to Barbara.
Thank you. Thank you, Philippe. Good afternoon, everybody. Before we start with the phase of the evaluation, a bit of timing starting from where Natasha left. So after the completion of the admissibility and eligibility phase, for the unlucky ones who didn't make it because of the issue just detected, you can expect to receive an information in the system by the second week of November. What happened afterwards is the start of the real evaluation process, which is divided in two parts, an external evaluation run by independent experts and an evaluation run by the services of the Commission. We are expecting to notify the results to the Member State by beginning second week of March. So this is a bit to give you an overall of the process. Now let's dig into the real evaluation. So the criteria, let me read it again for you. Priority and urgency, maturity, quality, impact, and catalytic effect. There has to be a pass mark in each criteria, which they are counted on 5, so 3 out of 5, in order for the proposal to be retained in this phase. However, you heard it today, if I'm not wrong, the oversubscription in the past 4 call was 4.11 out of 1. So the competition again is fierce, and hence it's important that with your proposal, you explain very clearly all these criteria. So if you reach a 3 in each criteria and your overall mark is 15, you have a passing mark, but it might not be enough in order for your proposal to be selected. This is also something important to bear in mind. Let's now start with the first criteria. Oops, sorry. Okay. So priority and urgency. What is this criteria about is really about the content, how the content of your proposal / project is fitting the overall framework and policy environment. So the first question to be answered and to be clearly explained, how does my proposal contribute to the TEN-T network? And for TEN-T network, it depends clearly on each topic and on each proposal. The relevance, is my proposal addressing the current work program 2021-2027 and the call and the topic? You need to carefully explain and show us how your project fit within these 2 points. The EU added value. We have seen already in the presentation given today that there are a number of priority and, as we call it, policy urgency that you were well aware already since the past, the start of the CEF2, like the Green Deal and the European Commission Smart and Mobility Strategy. However, word of all, we had a number of priority which came in during the implementation of the CEF program. Said ones like the Russian war of aggression on Ukraine and the solidarity lane. At the same time, as already mentioned, in November 2025, the publication of the military mobility package and the ongoing negotiation. This is for the part related also to what presented today for MILMOB. Then a number of Commission publication, regulation and initiative were published between 2024 and 2025. Colleagues already mentioned the importance and the priority of the Connecting Europe through high-speed rail. As for instance, if you have a project touching upon capital link by rail, this is an important point to mention. At the same time, the look at the industrial development of Europe with two key strategies came up in March this year. The Industrial Action Plan, together with the Maritime Strategy and the EU Port Strategy, looking at the competitiveness of the European industry, together with the competitiveness of the port, both in terms of resilience and decarbonization. And this can also be looked at together with the Industrial Accelerator Act. All this mentioned in this slide, you will find them in the footnote of the call, and will help you to frame your proposal exactly in this first criteria. Then, key criteria, it was said, I think counting 10 times today, this is the last call of the program. So we want to make sure that the money we are allocated are well spent and the results are coming in. So maturity is a real important criteria, not that it was not before, but here it becomes even more sensitive. So the first question to answer is, when is my project started? When you are putting a date to start in your application, ask yourself, is really my project starting on that date, or there are still a number of steps that I need to complete before? And when looking at maturity, we are looking not only in the technical maturity, but as well the financial and the procedural maturity. For the financial maturity, beside the CEF grant, which you will have to calculate it in accordance to what already presented, you need to explain clearly that the part related to yourself, either as a public or a private applicant, is there, so that the project can be fully completed. Then you have all this part related to the different contracting procedure. Are contracts for work already signed? If not, when? Are there challenges that you see happening throughout the contracting procedure? This can become very valid for major infrastructure projects, for instance. Permits. Are your work permits there, your development concept there? If not, when? And then a very important point for maturity, if your project are work project entailing an EIA, it's essential that the two first steps of the EIA, i.e. the EIA report and the consultation, have been completed. Should these two phases not be completed by the submission of your proposal, then the project cannot be considered mature. This is a very important caveat to bear in mind. Already just repetita iuvant, as we say, starting date not earlier than the submission date, study December 2029, and works December 2030. In cases there are tasks that go beyond these dates, they cannot be clearly taken into consideration in the evaluation. The quality. The quality is really the quality of the proposal, how you are writing, how you're setting your proposal, how you're explaining the different part. As Natasha already mentioned, give the same care to Part A and to Part B of the application. Sometimes we are finding contradictory information. between the two parts, between the budget, between the maturity in relation to the part of the EIA and the environmental compliance file. Give it a read to ensure that all these bits and pieces are part of a very consistent puzzle. Implementation plan, your timing. Again, are my different milestones that I set, as for instance, a signing of a contract, the start of the work, the completion of certain part of a major work, are consistent throughout the work packages, are the critical path between the work packages clearly described and set in a way that who is evaluating the proposal will have a clear understanding when your proposal will start, what will end, and everything which is in the middle. Risk analysis, management, control, and quality procedure. Are these set in place so that the complex project can be checked and monitored? Organizational structure, how you're going to implement the project, and I'll go back in a moment as well onto operational capacity. Communication. It seems a little box, but it's a very important one. You need to explain to us how the EU visibility and guidance are put forward to ensure that the euro spent on the project are visible for the business, for the citizens, for the society. If applicable, sustainable and maintenance strategy for a work project needs to be explained. As I said, operational and financial capacity. It's a check that we will be doing it during the evaluation. Operational, it's the applicant capable from a technical point of view to carry out the study or works put forward in the proposal. Financial, and I strongly suggest to really read carefully the link provided here. Is the applicant or the applicants sufficient stable from a financial point of view to carry out the project from A to Z or not? Important point for applicants who are new to the whole process. This is by default, they will be considered weak applicant. What does it mean? That if selected, at the stage of the grant agreement preparation, they will be requested to provide a financial guarantee. There is a clear paragraph on how this will be carried out in the call text and suggested to have a look at it. Impact. This is really the criteria to demonstrate which is the economic, financial, societal, environmental impact of the project to the society. Is there a demand traffic forecast study available which will help understand what will be the impact in terms of increase of traffic flows, reduction of congestion, modal shift from road to rail or inland waterway, for instance? It will have to be explained. Socioeconomic impact of the project as well in the society overall. For study is what's really the role of the study that you're putting forward in terms of decision-making tool within the project and overall also if existing in the global project. And where applicable, and we see it more and more, the impact in terms of interoperability, innovation, digitalization. And this links up to the strategy also presenting before. An important point in the impact, and for the one of you who already are familiar with the CEF call, is the climate proofing, which is part of the impact criteria. There are 2 slides for you that will help you with some tips to fill up this part, but also don't forget to review the guidance on climate proofing. So you will really have to explain which is the adaptation to climate and the mitigation to climate. An example, my project is taking place in an area of Europe with severe weather condition for 6 months of the year. Clearly, you'll have to explain how your project will be set up in order to ensure that this condition will not bring a stop to the project during the implementation and also afterwards. Flooding, all the different dimensions of climate change. And this, as said, so these are different tips to help you really fill this part on the application. Like you see, for instance, the general part of impact, how the cost of the reduction of greenhouse gas emission can be evaluated of the project, how your project per se or within the context of the global project also help the target of the reduction of 90% greenhouse gas emission by 2050 within the overall EU strategy. Catalytic effect. This is the last criteria. So what are we looking at here? Is the CEF funding within the capping that we do have in this call modulated accordingly, but the key question here is really asking, do I really need the CEF funding in order to carry out and complete my project? So what will be the role of the CEF funding? Is it an accelerator? Is a condition sine qua non? Is something that I might do without? Then financial leverage. Is the fact that the CEF funding will come in within your project will help also activate public or private investment around the project? And then lastly but not least, the CEF grant can also help to gather stakeholder acceptance or create a community of stakeholders willing to bring forward all the social, environmental, economic benefit that the project will bring in. Lessons learned here as well. This is what we find out in the previous call. Project management task included not less than 10, more than 10% of the total budget. The description of the work package extremely unclear, and as we said, either contradiction between part A and part B, some tasks that were clearly described in part B were missing in part A and vice versa, the number of milestones are matching, the deliverable, missing deliverable even, like a project with only one last deliverable. A very limited risk analysis that doesn't touch upon all the different parts of the project and the complication of the project, and very important for us, communication is part of your grant agreement if your project is selected. So it's not a decorative task, but it's actually your obligation to carry forward in the best possible way. And sometimes they're just 2 lines with no references on a clear measure that you will take forward. This is a bit like a slide to help you out, tick the different boxes and have a real way to be consistent, to be clear, to take us from A to Z, from a time point of view, from a financial point of view, and the different bits and pieces they really need to be looked at. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Barbara. Now we come to the socio-economic assessment. Please.
Good afternoon. So we're moving to the cost-benefit analysis, meaning the social economic assessment, which is a very important part of the assessment of the project, where we can present the benefits both for the society and for the economy, respecting the environmental objectives. This is a very exciting part, especially for my unit, which I'm representing. This is the financial engineering unit in CINEA, and we are coordinating the evaluation of the submitted cost and benefit analysis. Within this call and all the precedent calls, we have been requiring various cost-benefit analysis documents, which depend on the size of the project. So we have 3 levels of details. Either we have a full CBA document, or we have a simplified cost-benefit analysis, or we don't require a CBA at all for some of the projects. The full CBA is mostly for projects that include works or mixed projects with a budget of total eligible cost of 10 million. And then is the requirement to submit a full CBA. The full cost-benefit analysis consists of 2 documents. One document is the standalone text document with a minimum length of 20 pages, and this document should include all important information, including the assumptions, demand analysis, calculation, not all calculations, but the outcomes of the calculation, so economic net present value, financial net present value, and especially the assumptions and why the assumptions have been taken, also some reasoning, including the assumptions and the outcomes of which, to which the CBA has led. The second document is the CBA cash flow template, which is filled in to present the results of the CBA in a harmonized format. What means that you can prepare the cost-benefit analysis in any way you like, which is most applicable and adequate for your team, and then transpose the calculations to the cash flow template. For us, it's much simpler to review the same format of the CBA. And the CBA includes also some sheets that are free, where you can paste in also your own calculations that you have conducted in the background. A little bit more on this later. The simplified cost-benefit analysis applies for projects where the works are below 10 million euro, and in case of mixed projects, this is the eligible cost of the budget that refers to the works. So in this case, the simplified cost-benefit analysis calculator, as the name says, it's a tool that requires only some data to be introduced and then automatically calculates the an economic net present value, the financial net present value, and the indicators that are required for the economic and financial analysis of the projects. And in this case, also when we require a simplified CBA, but you still have a full CBA, you are invited also to submit the full CBA. You can then skip the simplified CBA if you have the full document. So we can assume that the full CBA is always the best document, but if it's not required, you can submit also a simplified cost-benefit analysis. Then how it looks like. It's a calculator in the form of an Excel sheet with some tools inside. And what is important here is that in the general assumption sheet, which is the main sheet introducing your project and the project description, you correctly select the indicated cells in the presentation. So you have to choose transport, you have to choose the cost-benefit analysis, and then also allow for the financial analysis. One more important remark before the submission: this tool comes with some macros and Visual Basic projects. So, and this is not accepted when it's submitted. So you receive the file in the XLSM extension, but then after it's been filled in, all has been calculated, you're sure that this is the correct data, then please save it as just a Excel workbook that will remove all these additional Visual Basics and the macros, and then it will be accepted by the portal. So this is an important remark, so that we have the documents, as colleagues explained, that we don't have documents that don't work for us. So in this call, the CBA is only required under the calls for Corrigan and Cohen calls. So it means this is for the rail project in the inland waterways, both supported from the general envelope as well as from the cohesion envelope. And as already said before, the full CBA goes for project above 10 million euro of works value, and the simplified for the projects below 10 million simplified 10 million works value. Now, in the case that you submit a new project that is a phase of a previous project, or you resubmit a project, you are allowed to use a CBA that has been originally submitted with the previous project, but there are two requirements that need to be fulfilled. So first one is that the project for which you're submitting the CBA was already included in the original scope of the CBA. So it means that all the calculations were done for the previous project and for the current project or maybe one more project. Anyway, this project should be included already in these calculations. And then what is most important, and maybe might be a little bit more difficult to fulfill nowadays, is that there have not been any significant changes. And it relates to the scale of the scope. The scope is very important of the project. And also the values of the original CBA. We have been now, in the last years, there have been a lot of volatility in the economy, and there might be some conditions that have changed. The cost must raise, the values, the economic values might have increased. So please be very cautious in looking at this, that we have the data up to date, because you might have a lower economic value of your project, or may have an exaggerated value of your project. And this will be also a point where the CBA experts will be critical. So before using the old CBA, please revise if this is all up to date, or if the changes are in an acceptable scope. You can always elaborate on this. And please note that you, by resubmitting the original CBA, you have to confirm this in the application form, Part B, Section 4.2, and confirm that these two conditions have been met. One more remark on the scope of the socio-economic assessment. The scope of the project needs to be correct in the CBA, and it might differ a little bit from the scope that it's the subject to the funding. And in the CINEA guidance on the economic appraisal of projects, there will be also in the presentation a link to the guidance. We have a simple guide, as you see on the site. I mean, here it's a bit small, but we invite you to consult the guide on this. And there are three main questions. The first question is if all necessary components have been included in the scope of the projects. What it means is if the project is self-sufficient in the functioning. So if the project that you submit within the CBA can function on its own. If not, then probably there are something is missing. Either another project that has been already implemented, or a project that has already is in the planning phase, or maybe there is some equipment or anything that makes possible to use the project that you're submitting. So the idea is that the project has to be self-sufficient, so that it has to include all components for the self-sufficient existence. Then the second point is are interrelated dependent activities are included. So there might be some standalone parts or equipment. It's a bit similar to the first step, but these are not required. They are interdependent, so they cooperate in a way with the project. And this you can include as well in order to correctly present the scope. So you might be using some of the equipment or infrastructure on any parts that are around, but the project can also live without them, but the project might better function with them. And then the effects on the wider transport network, and of course the project does not function on its own. It is part of some other, some bigger network or infrastructure, and there might be also effects and contribution that the project brings to the network. So please review the scope, have a bit of consideration and thinking about your project, and remember that this is the scope for the socio-economic assessment, so how the project impacts these interrelated aspects or some other components of which it might be dependent. Then a little bit of reflections on how to complete the simplified and full CBA. So first of all, what is important is to ensure the consistency with the application form. We repeat it every time, but there is always some differences, and please have a final review that it's correct and that the underlying calculations are correctly reflected above in the application form, in the CBA document, and in the standalone document, in the standalone CBA report, and the same goes also for the simplified calculator. So the data should match. If you use other values than the suggested parameters for the financial discount rate or the social discount rate, please explain why you choose another values. I will elaborate a bit more on this in the next slide. And then in the notice tab, there are some instructions that help you to correctly fill in both the templates. So it's about some copying of the revenues from the financial analysis to the economic analysis. And please remember also that there should be a demand analysis, a robust demand analysis that supports the calculations. And remember also to apply the incremental approach, what means that we have the factual scenario of the project and then the counterfactual scenario of the project. So it's usually either the situation where the project does not take place, or it's maybe less beneficial option financially or economically, mainly economically here. And remember also to use the correct signs. What we also ask you to do is if you copy some data from your calculations, there are 2 sheets that are just free and you can put there anything what you want. Please preferably use the calculations where we can follow up what is calculating how. So not only hard-coded data, I mean we can also analyze it, but it's more time consuming and also more difficult if you review the project for the first time. And as I mentioned, the financial discount rate, basically we recommend to use 4%, but you might decide to use a different percentage, and then please state clearly why you chose it and what is your basis or reference for this financial discount rate. And this is here covered by the evidence explaining why you selected this. And also you should include a calculation of the financial net present value based on the recommended discount rate, so you can compare it. If it's not included, we will do it on our own. And if the financial discount rate exceeds your WACC, in case you have WACC, so the weighted average cost of capital, then please also explain why you think that this project might be more risky than your usual business activity. And then remember also why would you engage in a more risky activity than as usual. If you don't have the weighted average cost of capital, there are some available data that are the average cost of capital for sectors and for entities, either private or public. Unfortunately, mostly relating to the US. And yes, this we were encouraging already since some time, using the final to fill in the checklist in the guidance document that you see the link in this slide here. So the CINEA guide on economic appraisal for the transport projects. It's a short document of 20-some pages that clearly describes the way how the project should be presented, how the calculator, CBA calculator can be used. And there is also the slide on the scope, and we have a checklist at the end. So we invite you to look at the checklist and to, if you can fill it in and also include it in your application as one of the attachment. So it reminds, it's a very simple checklist of 10 questions, but it reminds you of the most important parts that are crucial to have a correct filled-in cost-benefit analysis, firstly conducted cost-benefit analysis, and then submitted CBA. So you see the first question is about the correct scope. There we have the analysis of the 3 steps. Please review it. Then any deviations from the scope in the cost-benefit analysis, they are the good justification. Then the factual and the counterfactual scenarios on the incremental approach. The reference period, I think the colleagues have already emphasized that it's very important that it's correct in all the documents, starting from the starting year and throughout the whole implementation and operation. Discount rate, as I mentioned already, financial discount rate and social discount rate here. Yes, maybe it is also important, the demand analysis. Demand analysis sometimes is missing or is very limited, and it's very important, especially for infrastructure project. What is the basis, like what will be the demand, and all this financial data, including revenues and costs, are basing on the demand. And yes, please consider the externalities, that they are all included. The fact, I think, was like already covered by my colleagues. So there is still some guidance. If you're not familiar yet with the guidance, there is the Guide on Economic Appraisal for CEF Transport project, which is a big document that was published by DG Regio. It's a big document that includes all the basics with analysis of specific projects. It's a very valuable guidance. Our document, our CINEA guide, is a document that adds up with the specificity of the CEF Transport projects. If you have any questions, you have the possibility also to submit before this info day today the questions, but if there are still some pending, we invite you to use the financial mailbox of CEF Transport unit. Thank you a lot and good luck with the submissions.
Thank you very much. We are coming already to the last part of the info day, which is the question and answers part, because we have already received some questions since the call has been launched. And let's have a look at them.
Okay, we start with a question related to MILMOB call. First question. What is included in the EU military mobility network and where can it be found?
So the military mobility network, including the 4 EU military mobility corridors, are identified in a council document which was adopted 2018 and updated in 2025. This document is indeed not publicly accessible. As part of the application, the applicants must upload a declaration that the project is on the military mobility network. This has to be signed by the member states' authorities. So it's for the member states to designate the authority which will be in charge of this. So we encourage you to contact your CEF contact point, and let me underline one more time that the priority will be indeed on these military mobility priority corridors. So make sure in your contacts with the authorities that your project is on those if you apply under MILMOB.
Still in MILMOB, are sidings eligible for funding as part of rail transport infrastructure project?
Yes, indeed. For military mobility, sidings connected to the railway lines located both on the TEN-T and on the military mobility network are eligible. So the project then has, of course, to comply with the dual use requirements, as has been explained earlier on. And you will find this dual use requirement number 15 on siding spurs in the table 3 on railways in the annex to the dual use requirement in the regulation 2021/1328. Now I will ask you a question, Barbara, on maritime projects under MILMOB. 3 questions actually. Is the basic port infrastructure eligible for funding? And if a project proposal relates to the upgrades of a berth, does it need to comply with all dual use requirements applicable to port berths? And thirdly, is the construction of a fixed loading ro-ro ramp in a seaport eligible for funding as a standalone project?
Okay, first 2, yes, and I replied together. Both basic port infrastructure and the upgrade of the berth are eligible for MILMOB. However, important caveat, as already mentioned by Philippe for the question before, they need to comply with the dual use requirement Commission Implementing Regulation 2021/1328. The construction of a fixed row ramp is eligible. Mobile ro-ro ramp are not eligible for this call. Next question, still in MILMOB. If the expected gross weight of the bridge is lower, 120 ton, than the required value, 130 ton, of the dual-use requirement bridge gross weight, is the reconstruction of the bridge eligible for funding?
So the answer here is no. As we have said multiple times, the project has to comply with the technical parameters set in the dual-use requirements, and what we want to achieve is a network that complies with those standards to ensure interoperability and all that. So if the value of the future technical parameters of the constructed or reconstructed infrastructure is lower than the value in the dual-use requirements, then such a construction or reconstruction is not eligible for funding.
Last question on MILMOB, similar to what we had before. Is mobile handling equipment eligible for funding?
So, simple answer is no. Mobile handling equipment, particular for cross connection to multimodal nodes, is not eligible for funding. We are exclusively working with fixed equipment. So you find this specified in the remark to the dual-use requirement on loading ramps and handling equipment / parking capacity, building, storage and warehouse facilities, cranes, conveyors and other devices for moving freight and mobile assets such as locomotives are excluded. So have a look again at the dual-use requirements, because they clearly spell out what is eligible and under which conditions they are eligible. Then we go to inland waterways, and I have again 3 questions in one go here. First, under CEF Transport, could an inland waterways proposal include digitalization elements? Secondly, under CEF Transport, is shoreside electricity eligible along inland waterways on the TEN-T network? And thirdly, under CEF Transport, are works for the creation or upgrade of waterside infrastructure along the TEN-T waterway network supported?
Okay, so one by one. First question, reply. Works for the deployment of cross-disciplinary digital information and operation system for water and waterway management to ensure year-round navigability can be supported under CoreGen. However, and this is an important to underline, the RIS family type of equipment, RIS specifically Inland Port Information System, Inland Port Single Window, for this specific call are not eligible. Second question, shoreside electricity is not eligible under this call, CoreGen Inland Waterway. Shoreside electricity in inland port can be supported under SAST MobGen EMS works as we saw today. Last point, the works for the creation upgrade of waterside infrastructure along the TEN-T waterway are eligible along the waterway and not the inland port. This can include, for instance, facility for moving with the objective of improved navigation. However, waterside infrastructure for transshipment operation are not eligible.
I think you will ask me questions,
No, it's me for you.
Yes.
So we're going now to the AFIF, and now we are on the AFIF charging pools heavy-duty vehicle. 3 questions. How many recharging points can be combined in a charging pool for heavy-duty vehicles, including recharging points with the minimum power output of 1 megawatt or 350 kilowatt? Second question, concerning a charging pool for HDV of at least 4 megawatt charging system, MCS recharging point, each with the minimum power of 1 megawatt, are all charging points required to provide the full megawatt output simultaneously when they are used at the same time? Last question, can a charging pool dedicated to heavy-duty vehicle also be used for light-duty vehicle?
So let's go one by one. First question, to be eligible for funding, a charging pool combining MCS recharging points and combined charging system recharging points must include at least 4 megawatt charging systems, so 4 MCS recharging points, and each having a minimum power output of 1 megawatt. In addition, a combined charging system recharging points with a minimum power output of 350 kilowatt may be included in the same pool. However, the number of supported 350 kilowatt recharging points cannot exceed the number of supported megawatt charging points in each pool. For the second question, this is a classic, I think. So the answer is no. The call text is quite clear on that, because it speaks about publicly accessible recharging pools dedicated to heavy-duty vehicles equipped with at least 4 megawatt charging system recharging points, having each a minimum power output of 1 megawatt. However, not necessarily charging simultaneously at their maximum power. So this is clearly written in the call text. So technically, what does it mean? Each MCS recharging point must have a minimum power output of 1 megawatt, and it must be able to deliver this power. However, the requirement does not imply that all recharging points must charge simultaneously at their maximum power output. I think in real life it's not happening often that 4 trucks come at the very same time and start charging at the very same time. So recharging pools must be equipped with an energy management system that enables the dynamic allocation of available power among the various recharging points. So this is for the second question. And the third question about the light-duty vehicles, the answer here is no. We are speaking exclusively about heavy-duty vehicles. And in order to be eligible, heavy-duty charging pools must be exclusively dedicated to HDV usage and designed accordingly in terms of dimension and circulation. And this could, for instance, be ensured through signage and additional measures such as physical segregation from light-duty vehicles and or digital restrictions for HDV recognition. We have more questions on AFIF, this time on airports. Barbara, can you detail the type of airport ground operations that can be considered eligible for electrification? And are the following equipment eligible in an airport? Photovoltaic installation, battery storage, power management software, and electricity charging devices for aircrafts and airside vehicles.
Thank you. So to be first answer, and please note that I will give a list of equipment which is not exhaustive, so this will be followed up by a written question and answer. To be eligible for funding, the electrification of airport ground operation shall address either the electricity supplied to stationary aircraft or supply facility for ground operational vehicles airside. This may include, and as I said, non-exhaustive, the following list of equipment. Ground support equipment to supply electricity to aircraft, the famous 400 Hz or JPU, or air conditioning, PCA. The recharging infrastructure for electricity aircraft or airship, recharging infrastructure to electrify services to aircraft. Please note that vehicles for ATM are not eligible for funding. Second answer, AFIF is supporting the electrification of airport ground services and electricity supply to aircraft and airship, included, as mentioned by the question, management system and electricity storage inside the airport area. In association with this equipment and the equipment mentioned for the other answer, a project can also include a photovoltaic installation as a synergetic element, but the cost for this synergetic element needs to be limited to 20% of the total cost of the project.
Very happy to hear that air conditioning is eligible, because these days this will be more than needed. Another question on AFIF concerns the financial approval letter. And the question is simply, is such a financial approval letter a mandatory annex?
As already mentioned, and this is valid for all the AFIF typology. So the heavy-duty vehicle and airport, as well as maritime space. So the financial approval letter is a mandatory document. However, but if you cannot submit it within the application, at the very latest, it will have to be submitted 30 days after the notification that you will receive if your project has been selected. Now.
And we are moving to the European Maritime Space and Inland Ports. But yeah, I think this is still a question for you, to me.
So on onshore supply charging infrastructure greening of vessel. Is an investment in onshore power supply system in maritime and inland ports eligible? May a project combine onshore power supply investment in a core comprehensive maritime port and retrofit of vessel in one single application?
So the answer is 2 times yes. The first question, investments in onshore site supply systems are eligible. And such projects may also include associated works if they are needed for the supported facilities, such as connection to and or upgrade of the electrical grid for the part which is within the port. It was explained earlier on as well. So the application, if it contains such associated works, should demonstrate the need of such infrastructure. And on the second question, indeed, you can combine onshore power supply with the retrofit of vessels, but bear in mind the maximum EU contribution per project or per grant agreement will be capped at 10 million euros. And in addition, the maximum contribution for the retrofit is capped at 5 million euro per vessel.
Still on onshore and vessel, which type of inland vessels, inland waterway vessel, are eligible for funding under the CEF called SAST-MOGEN EMS works?
I think the figures have been mentioned earlier, but to be very clear, vessels which are within the scope of the Directive 2016/1629 are eligible. These are vessels longer than 20 meters with more than 12 passengers capacity. The inland vessel should be operating in the TEN-T Inland Waterways Transport Network that you find in the TEN-T regulation. Vessels which hold a union certificate in accordance with the directive I've mentioned, the 2016/1629, are also eligible. And I continue with a question on the onshore power supply and charging infrastructure in ports and the greening of vessels. What is meant by a hybrid technology for fitting and retrofitting in the context of this call? That's a difficult one.
Well, I invite you, thank you. I invite you to read the different combination that you have in the slide, which clearly show the hybrid technology for both fitting and retrofitting of a vessel. The hybrid electric vessel, as for instance, hybrid vessel combining battery electric propulsion, must have, as a result of fitting and retrofitting, shoreside battery charging, and their battery capacity shall be sufficient to cover at least 10 nautical miles or 18.52 kilometers for inland waterway vessel. Be aware of the limitations which are extremely important. Only the cost related to the electric, hydrogen, methanol, biomethane, ammonia, and wind-assisted propulsion system will be eligible for funding. Any component of the hybrid system related exclusively to diesel propulsion is not eligible for funding. We will follow up on this specific topic with written question and answer.
Very clear that we are financing the greening here. Then we come to the railway cluster. And yeah, no, you asked me a question on that.
We start with the first question on railway. Are railway connection to maritime or inland port eligible for funding?
So as in the past, yes, a railway connection, including port hinterland connection to a core maritime or inland port, is eligible for funding. Of course, if the concerned railway connection is part of the core network, as we have explained, the railway call is about the core network, but this is eligible indeed, the connection to the ports.
On the same, more or less, topic, railway, is ERTMS excluded from this call only for trackside deployment or also for onboard equipment? If onboard equipment is also excluded, is there another CEF call under which onboard ERTMS deployment could be funded?
So here the question is that ERTMS, both trackside and onboard, is not eligible for funding under this call. As we said, the available means were too limited to allow for the broad set of elements that we could finance in past calls, and this is why we could not open this topic this time. Let's continue with the question of railway station. The call excludes railway stations except for railway infrastructure components. Can a platform extension be considered such a component? Is it required to accommodate longer trains, including cross-border passenger services?
As mentioned by the applicant who asked this question, only railway infrastructure component of the railway station are eligible. To give you some example, but again, non-exhaustive and will be followed up in writing, and a list of railway infrastructure component can include tracks, platform, including the access to the platform, and any dedicated buildings where technical equipment necessary for railway operation is installed.
Yes, indeed, and this is because we see all kinds of stations in all types of beauties, so we are focusing on the railway infrastructure, so to have a very harmonized approach to all projects in this area. Oh, sorry, I went too quickly.
No, it's okay. Still on railway, is funding under this call available for project on the extended core network as well, or only for project on the core network?
So we have said it, the core network only is eligible for funding, the core network as defined in the TEN-T regulation. And again, this is a consequence of the limited means available. These were the questions on railway and no, sorry, that's okay. Here we are on the cross-border projects. If the railway section is considered a cross-border link, the investment is located entirely in Austria near the Hungarian border and has an impact on cross-border commuter traffic, is also a second support letter from Hungary recommended.
So, for project located entirely on one member state, there is no need for a letter support from the other member state. Nevertheless, it can be considered important that also the support letter for Hungary is uploaded. And where should you add it? My colleague before showed you all the different annexes on your submission system, and there is a slot called Other Annexes. That will be the part to put it.
And let me say, in general terms, of course, it is always welcome when applications are coordinated between different member states, and we see that also other member states support projects on the territory, on their neighbors, and of course, this is taken very positively in the evaluation. With this now we have covered the railway part, and we turn to the safe and secure mobility cluster, external borders.
Okay. 3 questions for you, Philippe. Are rail projects submitted under this topic required to meet the same technical standard applied to projects submitted under related topic? Second question, under CEF Transport, would a project for expanding and increasing the capacity of wide gauge trucks at Eastern European border station be eligible under this topic? At last, under CEF Transport external border topic, is the construction and/or upgrade of a terminal eligible?
So on the first question, the answer is yes. Projects submitted under the external border topic are required to comply with the same technical requirements as projects submitted under the rail topic. And this is, of course, we want to have an interoperable network, so you have to, in particular, respect the technical specifications for interoperability as set in the Interoperability Directive 2016/797. On the second question, the answer is no. Projects covering the upgrading and/or modernization of railway tracks with a gauge that is different from the European standard nominal track gauge are not eligible for funding. The only exception is here if they support traffic flow optimization at border control areas where severe capacity gaps have been identified. In such exceptional circumstances, indeed, we could also consider funding on a different track gauge, but this has to be then justified very clearly. On the third question, on the terminals, so yes, this topic may also concern the enhancement of an existing terminals, but the application has to demonstrate that the project would then facilitate traffic flows at the EU external border control area. So it's not about transshipment only, so a terminal is not eligible because it's a terminal. It has to demonstrate that this enhances the cross-border flows. With that, we turn to the smart and interoperable mobility cluster, and I have 2 questions here on the digitalization of road transport. First, are projects on the comprehensive network eligible under this call? And second, what is the difference between studies and works in the case of smart initiatives?
The first question, the answer is yes. As indicated in the call document, projects under this topic can be located on the core, extended core or comprehensive network, as well in the urban nodes. For the second question, let me remind that we are only funding works. The definition of studies and work, however, can be found at Article 2 of the CEF Regulation 2021/1153. We go now to some questions of general nature, and I will start with 3. First question, are applicants partner from Ukraine or Moldova eligible? Second question, are applicants partner from other third country eligible? And third question, can private entity apply for CEF funding?
Let's take them one by one. First answer is yes. In line with the section 6 of the call text, the call is open to third countries associated to CEF. You will find a list of participating countries in the call documents, and you will see there that both Ukraine and Moldova are associated to the Connecting Europe facility. It's the only 2 countries associated, so this only goes for them. Because the second question about applicants and partners from other third countries, normally applications from third countries which are not associated to CEF are not eligible. In the call documents, we explain, however, that there can be exceptional funding to entities from other countries that could be eligible exceptionally for projects of common interest in the field of transport if their participation is considered essential for the implementation of the project. So such a participation should be demonstrated by the applicant in the application, together with the approval of an EU member state. But just to flag that under CEF 2, so the current CEF, we have not provided such support. Private entities, of course, can apply under any call, so they are eligible entities. Their investment transport infrastructure must, however, be open to all potential operators in a non-discriminatory way. So private entities, yes, but with open infrastructure. The next question is about cost eligibility. So what is the minimum EU contribution for a project? And the second question is, I am going to have much more costs than those associated to the call threshold of 10 million euro. What should I declare?
So, first question. In line with section 6 of the call text, applicants are strongly encouraged to submit application for project with a total request of contribution of no less than 1 million. For the second question, I will recall you back to the presentation where you have the explanation of the budget on the submission of the application. So I encourage you to cross-reference this answer given now and this part. So your application should include the total cost eligible associated with the part of the project that you are applying for. The submission system will calculate the maximum EU contribution. However, as you know, in these specific calls, there are capping, so it's up to you manually within the system to align the requested EU contribution to the maximum threshold. Because otherwise, if you request more, as already been said, your project will be declared ineligible.
Very clear. More questions on the cost eligibility. Can project proposals for transport infrastructure include biodiversity elements as mitigating measures of the works?
This can be, first of all, described in the climate proofing part, and yes, as an ancillary element. That means that such measure should be required and need to be demonstrated as needed for the project implementation, and as well detailed as a part of the environmental impact assessment. Example of such an investment could include, for instance, on-site reforestation, specific infrastructure component, including noise protection barriers, or allowing the safe crossing of animals.
Absolutely, and I think we are very proud that we are running a program where we ensure full compliance with the environmental acquis. You have heard that this is an essential part of your application, the environmental compliance file, but then of course also the costs related to that can be considered eligible. I think this is the very good way to work on this. Still questions on cost eligibility. Can works carried out before the date of proposal, before the proposal is submitted, but no, sorry, I'm starting again. Can works carried out before the date of proposal submission, but accepted by the applicant after this date, be eligible? I hope you understand the question. Second question is, can works where the contract was awarded before the signature of the grant agreement, but implemented during the grant implementation period, be eligible?
So the first question, the answer is no, because costs related to works which are incurred before the start date of the project cannot be considered eligible. For the start date of the project cannot be earlier than the proposal submission date. Please be reminded that the period of the eligibility of cost will also be fixed during the phase of the grant agreement preparation if your project is selected for funding. The second question, in principle, this cost can be accepted with the caveat provided that the general cost eligibility conditions set in the grant agreement, including the EU procurement legislation, are in compliance. However, please note that we have two specificities, the EMS and the AFIF normal, where horizontal administrative costs are not eligible, as explained today, as for instance, project management, internal staff costs, communication, dissemination, travel, indirect costs, and other administrative costs. This is very important because these two topics and calls are different than the other, and they have different cost eligibility rules. On double funding, can CEF funding be combined with other grant, for instance, RRF, or through a national grants?
So the general rule is that projects may only receive one source of union funding in the form of grant support. But let me explain a little bit more. So it can be, of course, that RF and CEF finance the same global project, RF or cohesion or other EU funds. But what we have to ensure is that each activity or each work package can only receive one source of union funding. And if a certain work package or a certain activity is funded under the RF or cohesion, it is accordingly not possible to receive funding under the CEF program for this same cost item. You will accordingly need to specify other sources of financing for your proposal and make sure that whatever is financed by CEF does not receive grants from other EU programs. What can be combined is CEF funding with other national funding schemes. I think we can keep it at that.
On design and build contract, two questions. I intend to implement design and build procurement. Would it be possible to apply for only the study component? And two, for works proposal only, are design element, as for instance, the design part of the build contract, eligible?
So on the first question, the answer is yes. A procurement may typically be larger than the scope for for which support is requested from the call here. So as part of the global project, you may describe the full project, which covers then design and works. Nevertheless, the remainder of the application should be focused on only the elements for which you are seeking financing. So in this case, if you apply for studies, it should be only the studies that should be addressed in the application once you have described the global project. It is, of course, necessary that the cost of the study is clearly identifiable in the application and in the subsequent procurement and the invoicing. Now, on the second question, for works proposals only, the answer is no. Design elements are not eligible here because these are studies, and studies are not eligible under exclusive work applications. This is, for instance, the case for the European Maritime Space, AFIF, or new tech topics. Then a question on the CBA. I am preparing a proposal to be submitted to the SafeMobGen call. Can I still submit a CBA even if it is not required for this call? And second question is, my project is being implemented in 2 locations. Can I submit 2 separate CBAs, or should I submit one single CBA report including all activities?
So for the first question, the answer is no. Only proposals submitted to CoreGen and CoreCoin must provide a CBA. And you will see that if you try to do so, the system will block. So that's a very easy answer. For the second question, all activities should be merged into one single CBA. In the event that the full CBA requirement applies, one CBA report should be submitted covering all the location and all activities. Then we come to maturity. 2 questions. For an application related to works, what are the chances of success if I not yet obtain the development consent and building permit? For the plan, second question, for the planned project, the EIA procedure is expected to be completed only by the end of 2026. Can we still submit the valid application even if the procedure has not yet been concluded by the deadline of the 6th October?
We have repeated how important the issue of maturity is, in particular for this call. So, for the first question, it is possible to finance projects which still need to complete the development consent and building permit. But of course, comparing such projects where the permitting is not yet concluded, they will be less mature and will have lower points on maturity than projects which have already obtained the development consent and the building permit. But if this is not yet completed, projects should describe in Part B of the application form under 2.2 the expected dates to obtain the permits, but you can understand that, of course, there can always be hiccups in the permit procedure, and often we see delays happening at that stage, and this is, of course, something we do not want necessarily to risk. So you have to reassure us that if we select this project, that things will run smoothly, and for that, the further you are in the permitting, the better it is. For the environmental impact assessment, if it is required, then the project will not be selected if the key steps of the AR have not been completed, and the 2 key steps are spelled out. It's having carried out all the necessary consultations and having completed the environmental impact assessment report. And again, same logic here. If, of course, the whole procedure is already completed, it will be a positive element in the application. And if it is not yet fully completed, there's always a risk that things are getting delayed. And of course, this will impact the maturity evaluation, and such a project should then probably receive lower points on maturity. A very important criteria in this call, more than ever. Last question, I think, and it concerns synergetic elements. These calls have a threshold for the total EU contribution. How does this impact the total cost that can be declared for the synergetic element?
As already mentioned, for the specific call having a synergetic element component as well as the submission process, the synergetic element cost cannot go beyond 20% of the total cost of the action. I give an example. If you have a project with total eligible cost of 20 million, that means that the cost for the synergetic element cannot be more than 4 million. However, important, there are capping, there are thresholds. You will still need to modulate your CEF request according to the threshold. I repeat it for the last time. If you requested more, your proposal will not be eligible.
Indeed, so the synergetic element has to fit below the capping that is foreseen for the different calls, and pay attention to that. With this, we have covered the questions received so far. For sure, there will be more to come, so keep a regular eye on the frequently asked question sections that were indicated by Natasha in the presentation earlier, where to find those, because this will be updated regularly. With that, we have gone through what we wanted to present to you today. We were way more fast than we thought. This is good for us, for you as well, I hope. We would kindly invite you to provide your feedback on this info session. You can use the QR code, which is currently on the screen, to do so. That would help us a lot to make those events even better in the future. And with this being said, I think we can close this Info Day session. I want to thank all the colleagues who have participated in the preparation and in the presentations today. And I wish all of you good luck in the preparation of the proposals. We are looking forward to your applications. The competition will be tough, but this will also ensure that the money will be well spent on excellent projects, and we are looking forward to that to make the best use of the remaining budget of CEF2. Thank you very much and have a nice afternoon, and keep drinking water. It's hot out there. Thank you.